Imagine for a moment that the world you see around you, the streets, the trees, the people passing by, is actually a thin, fragile curtain. We walk through our lives assuming that what we perceive is the full extent of reality. But what if that perception is actually a protective layer? What if the real world is something much larger, much older, and much more terrifying, and we only stay sane because our senses are too limited to process it? This is the central haunting idea in Arthur Machen's 1894 novella, The Great God Pan. It's a book that sits in that strange, uncomfortable space between traditional Gothic horror and the cosmic horror that would later be perfected by writers like H.P. Lovecraft. It's about the moment that curtain is pulled back, and the horror of what happens when we realize we weren't meant to see what's behind it. The story begins with a scientific transgression. We meet Dr. Raymond, a man driven by an obsession with what he calls transcendental medicine. He isn't interested in curing physical ailments in the traditional sense. He wants to use surgery to bypass the limitations of the human nervous system. He believes that if he can surgically alter the brain, he can lift the veil of the physical world, allowing the human mind to perceive the spiritual, primordial reality of the divine. His subject is a young woman named Mary. The experiment is a horrific success. Through a radical surgical procedure, Raymond succeeds in opening her consciousness. But the human mind is not built to withstand the unfiltered presence of the divine. When Mary's veil is lifted, she doesn't find enlightenment. She finds something so vast and so alien that her mind simply breaks. She glimpses the god Pan, not the playful, satyr-like figure from children's stories, but a terrifying elemental force of nature. The experience leaves her a vacant idiot, a shell of a person whose consciousness has been shattered by the sheer intensity of the reality she witnessed. This single act of scientific hubris sets off a chain of tragedies that span decades and jump between the quiet landscapes of Wales and the crowded, dark streets of London. As the narrative moves forward, we see the ripples of Raymond's experiment. We learn about Helen V., a girl with strange foreign features living in a Welsh village. Her presence in the woods seems to trigger madness in those around her, and her presence is linked to mysterious disappearances. The story then shifts to the modern, bustling atmosphere of London, where the horror becomes more predatory and more human. We meet a man named Charles Herbert, who is living in utter squalor, a broken man. He tells a story of a life destroyed by his wife, Helen Vaughan. Helen is a woman of incredible, almost supernatural beauty, but there is something deeply wrong when you look at her too closely. She possesses a quality that defies easy description, a beauty that is simultaneously repulsive. Her very presence is lethal. In the Soho district, a man dies of sheer terror just by being near her. As the investigation into these strange deaths deepens, the character of Helen Vaughan emerges as a recurring predatory force. She is a woman who moves effortlessly between the highest echelons of London high society and the darkest corners of the underworld. A wave of inexplicable suicides begins to strike the West End. Victims are found hanging, their faces frozen in an expression of hellish despair. They have all, in some way, encountered Mrs. Beaumont, which is the name Helen uses when she's moving through polite society. The mystery isn't just about a woman who kills, it's about a woman who seems to be a breach in reality itself. The investigation is driven by characters like Mr. Clark, an observer who is increasingly traumatized by the occult phenomena he witnesses, and Villiers, an investigator who begins to see the pattern connecting these modern horrors back to the past. The turning point comes when Villiers shows Clark a sketch of Helen Vaughan. The realization hits, this woman is the direct consequence of Dr. Raymond's experiment decades earlier. The truth is finally laid bare through the recovered papers of a man named Dr. Robert Matheson. His writings provide the terrifying biological and spiritual explanation for everything. Years ago, through a series of reckless experiments linked to Raymond's original transgression, the natural order was corrupted. The experiment didn't just allow a person to see the divine, it allowed the divine to bleed into the biological world. Helen Vaughan is the daughter of the broken Mary. She is not fully human. She is a hybrid entity, a biological manifestation of the breach in the veil. She is a vessel for ancient chaotic forces that have been unleashed into a modern, structured world. Her existence is a perversion of the natural law. The story concludes by connecting these events to the ancient god Nodens and a primordial, terrifying marriage that took place beneath the shade of the woods. Helen's horrific, non-human transformations and her eventual death are not just crimes. They are the inevitable consequences of humanity attempting to pierce the veil of the natural order. She is the great god Pan made flesh, and her presence is a sickness that the world cannot survive. When we look at this story, we see a profound exploration of several themes that still resonate in horror today. The most important concept is the veil. In Machen's work, the veil isn't just a metaphor for ignorance, it is a necessary protective barrier. We often think of truth or enlightenment as something inherently good, but Machen suggests that there are truths that the human soul is simply not equipped to handle. The veil is what keeps us sane. It is the boundary that allows us to live in a world of cause and effect, of morality and logic. When Dr. Raymond lifts that veil, he doesn't bring enlightenment, he brings chaos. He proves that the human vessel is too small for the reality it is trying to contain. This leads directly into the theme of scientific hubris versus the natural order. This is a classic trope, but Machen gives it a uniquely spiritual, almost pagan, twist. In many science fiction stories, the danger of technology is that it might destroy us physically. In the great god Pan, the danger is that it might destroy the very nature of what it means to be human. By trying to master the supernatural through clinical, scientific means, Raymond doesn't master it, he corrupts it. He turns the divine into something biological and grotesque. He turns a spiritual experience into a hereditary curse. This corruption is most visible in the way Machen describes Helen Vaughan. He uses the concept of the uncanny and the grotesque to define her. She is beautiful, but her beauty is unsettling. She is attractive, but her presence causes a physical repulsion. This is a masterful way of describing something that defies human categorization. If she were simply a monster, we could understand her. If she were simply a beautiful woman, we could desire her. But because she is both and neither, she represents a breakdown of the human form. She is the point where the human and the non-human collide and dissolve. There is also a strong sense of atavism in the book, the idea of a reversal of progress. We like to think of humanity as moving forward, becoming more civilized and more rational. But Machen suggests that beneath our modern Victorian veneer, there are ancient pagan forces that are never truly gone. They are just waiting behind the veil. Helen Vaughan is a return of the repressed. She is a piece of the ancient, chaotic past that has been forced into the modern present, and her presence acts like a solvent, dissolving the structures of modern society, the laws, the social graces, the very sanity of the people she encounters. It's interesting to note that when this book was first published in 1894, it caused quite a scandal. People found it decadent and even blasphemous. It challenged the religious certainties of the time by suggesting that the divine might not be the benevolent God of the Church, but something much older, much more indifferent, and much more terrifying. Machen was playing with the idea of religious subversion, the idea that what we call evil might actually just be the raw, unmediated power of nature. Ultimately, the great god Pan is a bridge between two eras of horror. It has the atmosphere and the haunting, localized dread of the Gothic tradition, but it also contains the seeds of cosmic horror. It moves away from the idea of ghosts and vampires, things that exist within our world, and moves toward the idea of entities that exist outside our reality, whose mere presence threatens to undo the fabric of our existence. It leaves the reader with a chilling thought. Perhaps the limitations of our senses are not a flaw in our evolution, but a mercy. Perhaps we should be grateful that we cannot see everything, because if we ever truly saw the world as it is, we might find that we no longer have the strength to live in it.